Hello everyone, welcome to The Lit Show. I'm your host, Jeremy Fee. I am so excited to bring you the first ever Genre Wars reading wrap-up book battle. It's 2023, end of January. What did I read? What genres were they from? And now, what genres are you rooting for? Which genre do you hope wins for the month? And what book do you hope wins for the month? 17 books somehow magically fit into 16 slots, because I'm going to ignore one of them to make it work. You know, some months I might only read 8. Some months I might read a number between 8 and 16. Oh, hopefully we'll have at least one book to represent each genre each time. So here we go. We will slot them in and have them battle. No longer will I do the book battles based on my reading order. It is now by genre. Our 8 categories, that are really 7 categories, are general fiction, fantasy, mystery, thriller, crime, which I call MTC, horror, sci-fi, classic, nonfiction, and that nebulous 8th one called wild, where I can put anything. Let's say I read too much of one genre, I can throw them in there, or I'm just being a mood reader for the month, I can throw it in there, or maybe I read some poetry like I did this month, can throw it in there. With no further ado, here we go. The books for January 2023. Starting at the top with general fiction, we've got Larry McMurtry's series for The Last Picture Show. A long time ago, I really enjoyed The Last Picture Show. In addition to the book, there's a really fun film that you can watch. It's about a bunch of people who are graduating high school, coming of age, figuring out their lives. Small Texas town with teenage romance and all that good stuff. Very realistic. Larry McMurtry does a great job with the writing. And here this month I decided to continue the series because this helps me with 2 goals. One is to read more books by authors that I love, and another is to finish series that I have started. So book 2 in the series is called Texasville. It was a thick one. And then book 3 in the series is shorter. It is called Duane's Depressed. And when I look at these 2 books and battle them up against each other, I have to tell you that while I recommend them for people who enjoy realistic fiction, small Texas town gossip, drama, relationships, in these books the characters are now old enough that they've gotten married, they've had kids, they're dealing with how annoying it can be to raise rebellious children, they're dealing with small town politics and midlife crises that they're going through. So Texasville was at times a tough read just because it felt so realistic and I felt bad for the characters. Duane's Depressed is so depressing. The book has the word depressed in the title, but despite that, I'm giving the win to that book because I felt like more significant events happen. I don't want to give you spoilers, but there are characters, major characters that die, and it has a significant impact on the other characters, and I felt like it just carried more weight than the previous book, the fun satire about how we live our lives, but there was a lot of book with nothing really happening. It's people talking and hanging out, but Duane's Depressed was a shorter book, and I felt like more significant events happened. So it gets the win. Up next is fantasy. I finished the Dresden Files. I got caught up to where they are now. There are more Dresden Files that the author Jim Butcher has planned to release. We should be getting at least one in 2023, probably another one in 2024, but it's amazing. It's gotten through 17 books, and the book I'm ignoring this year and not putting in the battle is book 17.5. So book 17 of the Dresden Files is Battleground. 17.5 is called The Law. It's a novella, a lot shorter, easy to get through. I thought that book 12 in the Dresden Saga was amazing and how it was a culmination of the significant relationship developments and build-ups in the storyline, but that paled in comparison to book 17. Battleground made it even bigger. Bigger variables, more happening with. And then the other book that's going in the fantasy category this month is by Brandon Sanderson, good old Brando Sando. His secret project number 1 turned out to be Tress of the Emerald Sea, a nice, fun, relaxing read. If you are a fan of things like The Princess Bride and Brandon Sanderson's Cosmere, then you should like the way he kind of combines that type of storytelling together to give you Trust of the Emerald Sea. The whole spores element, the strange sea that was not made out of water, all of that. It's very creative. I applaud Brandon Sanderson for the work he's done and what he's trying to do for the community, for independently and self-published authors and audiobooks and all of that. Unfortunately, the book's not going to win the battle. The Dresden Files was a much more fascinating culmination of character work to me. Battleground is going to get the victory in this genre category this month. Then we get to MTC, Mystery Thriller Crime. We've got Agatha Christie this month for both books. I decided to venture into the Tommy and Tuppence series. I saw that this series is supposed to have 5 books in it, so I'm going with books 1 and 2 this month. Hopefully I'll get through the others February and March. Tommy and Tuppence are a couple that are very funny. They decide, because of the way the economy's going in England at the time, that they should go ahead and set up themselves as adventurers for hire, becoming private detectives, that sort of thing. I felt like the first book did a nice job of establishing the characters. It's called The Secret Adversary. I recommend it. The second book, Partners in Crime, felt weird. It was a series of short stories, short adventures that they had. Some of it felt repetitive with what they had gone through in The Secret Adversary and the way that it was set up, but that's okay. I'm giving the win to the first book because of the way that it introduced the characters and had them fall into this line of work. And then we get to the horror category. I was very excited to read a book by Priscilla Bettis. She is here on BookTube and HorrorTube, but not in the sense of having her own channel and making her own videos. She is a commenter in the community, visiting other people's channels. But she's also a writer. I had read her short story, The Hay Bell. The Hay Bell was great. It was really amazing. So I was looking forward to reading this book called Dog Meat. It was viewed as extreme horror with some warnings given about dogs in the story being killed and that sort of thing. So I was concerned about just how extreme it might be. Maybe because I had the warnings, or maybe because I've become somewhat desensitized having read some extreme horror in the last couple of years, but it read just fine to me. In fact, I would say it read like literary fiction. It is set in an alternate reality or another nation where society is very different, but to me, rather than just classifying it as extreme horror, I felt like it had themes like 1984. It was set in the 1980s. It was very fitting the way that happened, and it read like literary fiction to me. So I know it's technically extreme horror, but I highly recommend it. If you are trying to decide whether or not you should check it out, I think you could stomach the read, since I was able to get through it no problem. The other book I have in the horror category is one of those books that was recommended. I had found a Reddit thread discussing stories that had evil fae creatures in them, people who had to deal with fairy creatures from the woods and changelings and that sort of stuff. So it was back from that list that I found months ago. It is called The Hidden People by Alison Littlewood. It was interesting. It's an interesting book. I suggest you give it a try if you like those kind of dark fae, evil fairy, kind of horror thriller stories. But it pales in comparison to the work of Priscilla Bettis. So Dogmeat easily gets the win here in the horror genre this month. That's the first half the bracket, the top half. Moving on to the second half. For science fiction, I read a book recommended by Michael K. Vaughan not too long ago. Probably a couple months ago, he made a video talking about science fiction classics. It's called The Killer Thing by Kate Wilhelm. It is a short old paperback book, and I was very happy to read. It helps with my challenge to try and read as many books as I can before buying a new book, the Read What You Own challenge. The Killer Thing is a story that is classic sci-fi, a man stranded on a planet, fighting a killer robot, man versus machine. If you like classic sci-fi, I really think you'll enjoy the book. The other science fiction that I read was by Gareth Howells, who has an amazing YouTube channel. I highly recommend you check it out. I will link it down below. He recently did a recorded concert, a tribute for Pax Panic to help raise money for Pax's GoFundMe as she is battling cancer. It was very sweet of him, the way that the video came together. I sent him my poetry reading for PAX, which he included there at the end of it. He had a lot of guests, a lot of recordings, a lot of videos in there. I really appreciated he did that. I was planning to read his book because it had been recommended by other booktubers, including Michael K. Vaughan. It is called Out Among the Ice Beacons. It starts out kind of slowly with some high school students in class making fun of the teacher, the kind of reject nerd character who's been building a strange machine at home left over from his father's plans, and it is a machine that can travel to another dimension, travel across the multiverse. And I don't want to give you too many spoilers, but once you get past that kind of slow beginning, it gets really exciting as you have these teenage characters who end up on another planet and dealing with that sci-fi reality there. So he did a great job writing that, and the intrigue of that I enjoyed more than The Killer Thing by Kate Wilhelm. So Gareth Howell's book is gonna get the win here. We then get to classic literature. A while back, I discovered that Oscar Wilde's book, The Picture of Dorian Gray, has had some more recent editions released. Multiple companies or universities have released versions of this, I guess. You can find it online. It is the uncensored Picture of Dorian Gray. It's sort of a reread, but it's a different edition, a different version of it, where they had taken what Oscar Wilde had submitted originally before it was heavily edited, because it was so scandalous for Oscar Wilde to be including elements that he was back in the day. Unfortunately, the book was a bit of a letdown. What people considered scandalous back then is not really the same as what would be considered scandalous today. And then the other classic that I read was The Prisoner of Zenda by Anthony Hope. If you want to participate in Roger's Book of the Month book club, this is what is picked for February, The Prisoner of Zenda. I did not have the patience to wait until February. This book is available for free online. You can download it as an ebook. You can even get a free audiobook to listen to online, no problem. Of these two books, The Prisoner of Zenda is gonna win. It gets a victory for me because it has exciting action, adventure in it. It's got some of that classic romance in it. And then we've got our nonfiction category. I read 3 nonfiction books this month. 2 of them are going right here in this category. The other one will get a wild spot. All 3 of those nonfiction books, though, are about acting and an acting method called the Stanislavski method or the Stanislavski system. The first book here is the Stanislavski system. Its subtitle is The Professional Training of an Actor. It's by Sonia Moore. It's a short book that goes into the history, who Stanislavski was, the culture around the Russian theater, and all of that before explaining the psychology of this acting technique. And then you have the Stanislavski and the Actor book by Jean Benedetti, which is similar but takes a different approach. It's slightly thicker, but still a small book, easy to read. I appreciated getting a better understanding of this acting method. Of the 2 books, I'm gonna pick the shorter one for the win here. I enjoyed more of how it talked about why Stanislavski developed the system that he did. And then we get to our wild category, which has my third Stanislavski nonfiction book. It's called Stanislavski in Practice. It is a second edition by Nick O'Brien, and it's really made for teachers to use these activities in trying to help mentor, train, teach, coach young actors. And if you're thinking, why in the world is Jeremy Fee reading these books? I am a high school teacher, high school speech and debate coach. Part of the speech and debate world is students competing in acting interp events, literary interp acting. It helps me to help my students to think through all of this. The other book that's going here in the wild category is a poetry book from BookTube's own Peter Okonkwo. It is Escape from the Unseen Dungeons. This is part of a series of books that he has put together. I absolutely love this poetry. It is philosophical. It is spiritual. The narrator, main voice character that you get coming across in this story has felt tortured, just horribly tortured, his soul in agony, and he cries out to God, begging to understand why he has had to suffer the way he has, why he has had to go through all of this in his life. And it's amazing. If you enjoy spiritual, philosophical poetry, then you should give it a chance. Read the work of Peter Okonkwo. It easily gets the victory here in the wild category. You may notice I'm using the phrase easily gets the victory because last year in 2022, there were a lot of months in my book battles when there was a lot of tension and I felt stressed and it was difficult for me to pick a winner. So I am very relieved that some of these I'm just like, yep, that book was clearly better than the other book. Let's move back on up to the top. We are now looking at the quarterfinals competition. We had Duane's Depressed by Larry McMurtry advance. It's competing against Dresden Files Book 17 Battleground by Jim Butcher. How in the world am I supposed to compare these two books? We've got realistic fiction with depressed characters who are trying to deal with what it means to be in their 40s and see their children mess up their lives and realize that they are unhappy with the state of things in their own lives. We've got that up against an exciting fantasy story with a character who has failed in some ways, made some bad deals, gone through some horrible events, and now has to suffer the consequences. Of the two of them, I suppose the Dresden Files is more exciting. It's interesting to read about these depressed people in their lives in the Larry McMurtry fiction, and I will continue that series, but I'm probably more excited to continue the Dresden Files. Up next, we've got the pairing of The Secret Adversary by Agatha Christie, some exciting private detective mystery work, up against Dogmeat by Priscilla Bettis. Not a tough decision. The book by Priscilla Bettis was much better at capturing my attention. In fact, even though The Secret Adversary is also short, like Dogmeat, I was not able to finish it in one setting. Dogmeat I picked up and I canceled my plans for the rest of the evening. I just finished reading that book that night. It was that good. I couldn't put it down. We then get to the pairing of Out Among the Ice Beacons by Gareth Howells up against The Prisoner of Zenda by Anthony Hope. We've got sci-fi action up against a classic action story. While I do greatly applaud Gareth Howells, his work on BookTube, and he's put together an interesting book here. The work by Anthony Hope, The Prisoner of Zenda, is a classic for a reason. Apologies to Gareth Howells, but The Prisoner of Zenda is advancing in this one. I can't just have the BookTubers win no matter what. I'm gonna give you an honest battle here. We then get to the nonfiction Stanislavski System up against the poetry of Peter Okonkwo, Escape from the Unseen Dungeons. Another easy decision. The poetry is advancing. We can take a moment to look at our 4 semi-finalists here. It's always nice to let them breathe a little bit. Our 4 final genres this month are fantasy with Battleground by Jim Butcher. Really that main character, Dresden, carrying the series. Then we've got Dogmeat by Priscilla Bettis. I hadn't mentioned this yet. Don't want to give you specific spoilers, but there was an interesting twist, an interesting reveal that happened there toward the end. Then we've got classic action adventure with The Prisoner of Zenda by Anthony Hope. And finally, in the semifinals, Peter Okonkwo's poetry, Escape from the Unseen Dungeons. So let's go to the top. There's that battle we've got to do between Dresden Files and Dogmeat. Pitting these two against each other, not a tough decision. Priscilla Bettis' book is advancing once again. The Dresden Files is fun and exciting. Sometimes even more painful to get through than the extreme horror can be at times. Even though Priscilla Bettis' book is extreme horror, it did not feel painful for me to get through. To me, it was a smooth read, a very fascinating read. Alright, the second half of semifinals, The Prisoner of Zenda by Anthony Hope up against Escape from the Unseen Dungeons. The Prisoner of Zenda did not really cause me to have philosophical, spiritual thought. It didn't really require brain work. And if you've paid attention to this channel for a long time, you know I like the thinkers. I like books that make me think. Peter Okonkwo's book, his poetry, it made me think. It really made me think with the spiritual and philosophical elements. So, the poetry is advancing to finals. Very exciting this month. Our finals battle is 2 people who are part of our online book community here on YouTube. Priscilla Bettis comments regularly on a lot of people's HorrorTube channels, BookTube, AuthorTube, and then we've got Peter Okonkwo, who you should know from the channel P English Literature. He does a lot of author interviews, reviews a lot of books, really interesting BookTube channel. I could not go wrong picking either one of these, and it is very odd to put some horror, extreme horror, up against some poetry, spiritual, philosophical poetry. Apples and oranges, hard to make the comparison here. So it comes down to the fundamental question that these end of the month book battles are really about. Which book did I enjoy more? And tipping the scales even ever so slightly in this one, I enjoyed Dogmeat a little bit more than I enjoyed Escape from the Unseen Dungeons. So I salute both of these authors, but the winner, my best read of the month for January 2023, is the book by Priscilla Bettis, Dogmeat. This book really gets into some heavy philosophical thinking. It really takes a look at how society is put together. To me, functions very well as social, political, economic commentary. Even even really, if you think about it, asking, how do we treat our neighbors? And what does that mean? How does that affect our lives? What would we be willing to do for the people around us? Oh my goodness, that character, that main character, that protagonist, he suffers so much. And I would tell you, other than 1984, what books and short stories that it reminds me of, but the point at which I start naming those stories or those authors, it would give away the ending. It would be spoilers for the ending, because I know the titles that I want to name to explain what I love so much that I've read before that I thought of while I read this book. But if you've read those stories, immediately you'd be able to predict the ending. Highly recommend the book. Let's put it in for our slot, our first winner for 2023 Best Read of the Month, as we build up to an end of the year super book battle once again. I hope you've enjoyed the book battle this month. Stay tuned to the channel, because my next videos coming up should be my currently reading TBR for February and or some tag videos. I want to thank all the people who have been tagging me in their tag videos. I love being tagged, and I promise I will get around to those tag videos here soon. That's it for today's video. Every day is a good day for a book battle or a book talk. Peace.